workforce management education. And from that, in 2016, the first original Air Force K-12 STEM strategic plan was born. It was the idea that they wanted to formalize officially an office that would provide centralized oversight over top of all of these decentralized siloed things that were happening, and try to bring them together to hopefully be moving towards a common goal with common metrics, common pots of funding, things like that. So the goal was to sort of simplify it a little bit by making sure that there was some strategic leadership happening at the top. Next slide, please. All right, so present stage, next slide, please. So this is a chart that we like to use just to kind of give you an idea of the commitment we've made to creating really a continuum or a pipeline of programming across the department. So you'll see that it's kind of sectioned off depending on what phase of life you're in, if you're participating in any of these programmings or opportunities with us. The biggest and the first one is K-12 outreach. So anything from kindergarten through 12th grade. You can see a ton of different programs that we're engaged in. And these are just from the ones from the K-12 STEM office. We have Civil Air Patrol on there, which is a 501c3 that's operated out of the Department of the Air Force. We also have the Air and Space Forces Association programming. We have JROTC. All of those things do not happen under my umbrella, but a majority of these do. So we have a very, very large program. We service around 1 million students a year with our K-12 STEM outreach. That doesn't include some of those other groups as well. And with the goal that we want to funnel them into opportunities that we offer at the university and college level. So when they go into post-secondary school, hopefully we've spent years creating a spark, creating that inspiration, getting them excited, maybe providing some supplementary skills to get them ready for their college careers. And then once they're there, hopefully they'll come and work with us as interns. That's sort of the primary goal once you hit that level. And we have a lot of different opportunities that are really fantastic, help pay for college, give them opportunities to work hands-on in really amazing labs with really amazing equipment. And then by that point, we hope that they'll want to come and join us and apply to work for the Department of the Air Force. So one of the things that I don't actually like about this graphic that I'm working to change is that it really shouldn't be a pipeline. It needs to be a cyclical graphic, because the workforce development folks, the Department of Air Force employees, whether military or civilian, the goal should be that they reinvest into the system. So our program is mostly volunteers. We do have a base lead, which I'll talk about in a little bit, at every single site that we have programming. But the meat of the programming is done by our scientists and engineer volunteers. And they're the ones that are taking the time out of their busy schedules, their busy science and STEM work that they're doing, and they're spending time with these K-12 students of the next generation. So ideally, and the whole federal government's guilty of this, because we all have like if you look at NOAA or NASA, we all have a version of this internally, but it really needs to be a circle, because all of the folks that work in those federal labs and centers need to be reinvesting in the students. That's the only way that we can continue to make sure that the next generation is ready to be a part of the defense workforce. So I'm working on updating this graphic, but I'd like to share that because I think that's something really important to point out, because we can't do it alone. Next slide, please. All right, so this is a quick snapshot. There's really 3 main areas, I like to call it a 3-legged stool, of how we approach K-12 outreach within the department. So I'm going to hit a little bit more in depth on each of these, but essentially it's made up of the K-12 STEM office, which is sort of the national centralized level, the command central, if you will, of how we sort of operate and execute programming and strategy and funding and all those good things. Then we also have our national partners. So these are partnerships that we hold at that sort of centralized level, where we partner with the other components within the DoD, and there are some other groups that I'll talk about here in a little bit. But the idea, again, is to, rising tide lifts all boats, right? So not reinventing the wheel. We definitely are not in a position to be, solving the STEM crisis in America. There's many, many, many nonprofits and academia and federal organizations that are trying to all pitch in and holistically, solve this problem together. And so we want to make sure that we're partnering with them and doing our part in order to contribute to that STEM ecosystem. And then the largest part of our entire program is our decentralized sites, as we call them. So we have base programming at over 42 sites. And each of those programs operates a little bit differently, and I'll kind of explain that here in a little bit. Next slide, please. So first off, like I mentioned, National STEM Office. There I am at the head, trying to steer the ship, fly the plane, whatever you want to call it, and make sure that nothing falls apart around me, which can be a taxing and challenging job some days because this program is quite large. And like many education programs, under-resourced. I was used to having, when I worked at the Science Museum prior to this, I had a team of 25 people. And we were executing programming in a very small regional area. But there's a team of 3 of us that are currently operating the entire national program across the Air Force and Space Forces. So there's me, then there's Madison, who is one of our contractors. She helps a lot with our evaluation and coordination of operation things that we're doing sort of on a national level. If we've got programming we're trying to do, she kind of works on that. And then Jordan, who is really helping us expand our digital and virtual footprint, because that's one of the ways that we've determined we're going to make the biggest impact in the geographic areas where we might not have a base program or we don't even have necessarily a base. But as mentioned before, we do everything from strategy, implementation guidelines, the policies and procedures of how you operate your programs. We provide a lot of evaluation work, professional development to our base leads and to our volunteers. We communicate across the programs. We're sort of the conduit from the DoD and the other federal agencies to talk about whatever STEM things are happening in the world. And then the most important thing to the bases is that we give them money. We provide the funding. So that's probably, they would say, the #1 thing that we do for them. But we're more recently, especially in the last 2 years since I've been here, expanding to some more national strategic initiatives, including these more enterprise level programs, which I'll give some examples of here in a moment. Next slide, please. So speaking of those sort of enterprise level programs, these are 2 national efforts of note that we started last year that we're really excited about, that are not necessarily base centric, but are more specifically, any base can be involved, any of the folks that work at those bases can be involved, but it's something that we're trying to do on a bigger scale, essentially. So the first one, and one of the ones that is near and dear to my heart, particularly because we're kicking it off again in 2 weeks, is the STEM to Space event. So 2 birthdays ago for the Space Force, Space Force Public Affairs determined they wanted to do something to celebrate and get particularly students and teachers engaged with the first anniversary of the Space Force. And so what started as 15 Guardians basically spending 2 whole weeks of their time in December, this would have been 2 years ago now, basically connected with over 300 classrooms, just virtually talking about what Space Force was, talking about the mission, talking about STEM careers, and it went really well. But they realized they wanted to scale up. In order to scale up, they needed help. So they came to us and they partnered with us, the K12 STEM office, and said, can you help us make this, a larger event, something that can really have an impact, maybe not even just across the United States, but worldwide for the schools, especially the JODEA schools, the defense schools that we have overseas, and the students that are military connected students at those bases overseas. So our partnership was born. We did our very first event together last year, so the 2nd anniversary of Space Force. And it was a huge hit. We managed to expand to almost 700 classrooms in all 50 states. That was kind of one of our benchmarks. We said we want to hit at least 1 classroom in every one of the 50 states, and we managed to do that. So that impacted around 38,000 students. And these were all pairings that we did ourselves. We took the 290 Guardian volunteers that we had, and we would pair them with classrooms based on their location, time zone, area of interest. We did our best because, of course, a lot of it's the hand jamming where you sit there and you say, okay, who's going to be paired with who? Creating the introductions for them to create an opportunity during the 3-week time period that we consider for the STEM to Space event, the first 3 weeks of December, an opportunity for them to virtually, and sometimes even in person, and when available or if they were nearby, particularly Colorado was a really great example where we had a lot of in-person engagements because we have so many Space Force bases there. A lot of the students got to see their Guardian in person, which was a big deal because we're still in the middle of the pandemic. So you can see everyone's got masks on in almost all of the photos down below. But the idea, again, was this personal opportunity to talk about their stories, to talk about why STEM is important for the Space Force, and really answer questions, because one of the things we're having trouble with is awareness. Just the fact that a lot of students don't understand or know that you can serve your country, you can be a part of the Department of the Air Force or the Department of Defense and not be necessarily in a uniform. The majority of our, hi, Jeff made a camera appearance. Hello, Jeff. The majority of the students don't realize what opportunities there are for them. So that's one of the biggest goals that we have, is just spreading the news, and particularly about the Space Force, because I'm sure, as you're all aware, Space Force had a little bit of a troubled start, just public affairs wise, regarding the Netflix show that I'm sure many of you are aware of, and all the jokes that kind of spun off of that. So really helping students understand, because they'll probably be the first generation that will grow up with Space Force as part of what they know. So we think about the Air Force, obviously it split off, in the late 50s from the Army. And at the time it was probably very confusing for, the general average citizen to understand what was happening. And we're in that same situation now where a lot of adults are like, why do we need Space Force? What's the purpose? What's the point? It sounds stupid. So we're trying to really help spread the word among the students that will be the next generation, so that they understand that why it's so important to have a service dedicated to space, and really what it's about, because a lot of the questions that these guardians get is always, are you an astronaut? Can I be an astronaut in the Space Force? And it's really more, it's more than that. It's about cyber, it's about protecting that cislunar orbit. So those are the things that we're trying to share with students, so that they really walk away with a fundamental understanding of what the purpose of Space Force is and truly how it differentiates from NASA. So the STEM to Space event, again, we're really excited. We've been working so hard on this. We've got several live events. We've partnered with code.org, which is a huge code nonprofit that works on providing coding opportunities for students around the world. We've got a USO panel that's going to be happening with some of the senior Space Force leadership. So we've really knocked it out of the park. As of today, we're still 2 weeks out. We do get a last minute signups. We're around 600 classrooms, and then, but we also have 315 Guardian volunteers this year, so we're really improving our reach. And then the other one that we worked on last year that we started just to see how it would go was a national teacher professional development opportunity. Professional development for teachers is something that we really believe is important, because they're the front door to students. You don't get to the students unless you get through the teachers, right? Especially in a classroom setting. So we believe it's really important to cultivate relationships and provide opportunities to connect with teachers at all levels, to make sure that they understand, again, these are the opportunities that your students could have, especially in a STEM career if they're not aware. But we also want to provide whatever assistance we can. We have access to really cool science, really cool research, really cool materials and resources, and we want to be able to share them. So actually the Naval Academy received a grant from the DoD in order to provide what they're calling an all services teacher professional development training. So it was a 3-year training where we internally would attend a training that they provided, and they're the ones paying stipends for the teachers and paying for the materials, and then we would go out to our various locations and services to be able to provide teacher professional development to the teachers in those areas. So we presented eight of them at 8 different base locations around the United States last year. We were able to impact around 125 teachers, and it was so popular that they were like, we want to come back, we want to do it again. So we're aiming for 10, because again, we have a very small team, so our bandwidth is very limited, but our goal is to try and reach 10 bases this year and impact the teachers in those areas as well. Next slide, please. Another really important effort that I wanted to point out, this isn't necessarily just for FY22, but this has been going on for many, many years, is our Tri-Service Junior Science and Humanities Symposium. So this is a fantastic opportunity for high school students from around the country. Essentially, it started way back during basically the race to the moon. The Army wanted to create a conduit or a pipeline to get students really excited about wanting to be in STEM careers, particularly in STEM in the Department of Defense or in NASA. And so they sponsored an annual STEM competition where high schoolers do original science and math and technology research, and then they present it and they are able to receive scholarships for that effort. So several decades later, the Navy jumped on, and then about a decade after that, I think the early 90s, the Air Force jumped on as well. So we get to, as sister services, present this opportunity for students all over America. And essentially, it's like what I said, is this high school students who they find mentors and they do original research, which is mind-blowing to me. I will go to some of these events and the kids will talk us through their posters, and I don't know how they know how to do all of this stuff at that age. I certainly was not doing this type of thing at their age, but they do just some of the most amazing things. One of the young gentlemen I got to sit with at the national event last year was a young African-American gentleman from Philadelphia, and he was there presenting. He had found a way to build a working prototype of a better prosthetic arm that was not only more effective at grabbing and picking things up, but was cheaper to produce than the ones that are currently on the market. He did win his category, and he won a massive scholarship from this, which it just happened. I was just so impressed, and I was so excited to hear he won, because he was talking about all the nuanced details of it and how he found mentors at the local biomedical location. And it was just unbelievable. And every kid has a story like that. They're all doing, some of them were doing protein research for COVID. And I mean, just groundbreaking stuff at a high school level. Some of these kids are in 9th grade that are participating in this event. So we have 48 regional competitions all over the United States during the winter months. So almost 3,000 students participate. And then 245 of those students get to come to the final competition event, which each service takes a turn hosting every year. So last year happened to be the 60th anniversary. We also got to host it in New Mexico outside of Air Force Base. And so all of our judges are from the DoD, from around the Department of Defense. We give opportunities to the students to take tours of the local base, also of the local other STEM, whether it's a university or if there's museums, we do tours with them as well. And it's a really, really fantastic event. So you'll see a picture of Major General Heather Pringle, who's the current commander of AFRL. And she gave a really fantastic speech that really got kids excited. One of the really cool things about it was that there were students, especially female students, that spent 45 minutes waiting in line to meet her and get a picture with her. So if that isn't a great anecdote of the reason we need to have diverse faces in front of these students. And the girls were just, the questions they asked weren't even about STEM. It was about, how do you sit in a room with all these men generals and talk to them? Those were the questions they were asking during her speech. And you can tell that it really had an impact on them. So you can see a picture in the lower right corner. I tried to get a picture of the line, but it was so long I couldn't fit everybody inside of it. And so she gave out autographs, and she was a rock star for a day. So that was really cool. Next slide, please. So this gives you an opportunity to see our base level programming. This, like I said, is the largest portion of what we do. We believe in a decentralized system, which we don't believe in a siloed system. So I like to make this very clear. Silos means we're working on our own, we're not connected in any way, but a decentralized system is the idea that we're gonna provide some upper level guidance, we're gonna provide funding, policies, procedures, strategic level information. And each of the bases, based on the STEM ecosystem they're located in, is going to determine how best to serve their community. I don't believe in a copy-paste method of doing programming. I think that can actually be really detrimental to students, because one of the most important things we can do is meet students where they are. And if we're not able to pivot and transform the curriculum or the programming that we're doing for them based on what it is that they need, then it's probably not going to be a really great investment. So we really believe in giving each base the opportunity to determine what it is they want to do in their communities, particularly because each base is located in a very unique situation. One of the examples I like to give is Wright-Patterson, where I sit at AFRL headquarters in Dayton, Ohio. It's an urban environment. It's actually a huge STEM hub. They have the STEM ecosystem that's very strong. We have a museum there, we've got several museums there that are focused on STEM. We've got universities, it's a really great area, and there's a lot of opportunities. And it's also an urban environment. So there are a lot of students from, minority backgrounds or from impoverished areas that might not necessarily have the support that they need in order to move forward in the STEM world. So the way that Wright-Patterson ties into that STEM ecosystem is going to look a lot different than, say, Vance Air Force Base, which is on the panhandle of Oklahoma. Vance Air Force Base is very small. It's in a very tiny community called Enid. Enid, Oklahoma is very rural. Most of the adults there didn't even complete a 2-year degree, so that might be the highest that they go. And they don't have opportunities like that. So there isn't really even a STEM ecosystem to tap into. So the way that Vance interacts with that community might just be helping to provide materials for their science labs, which are extremely under-resourced there. So we don't want to say this is what you have to do at each of these locations. We want them to partner with organizations in their communities, find those places where STEM is already happening, and figure out a way to plug in. Now, does it work perfectly every time? Absolutely not. Depends on the base lead. So one of the challenges and struggles that we face is, again, being an education program. Every education program is chronically under-resourced. So almost 80% of these bases do not have a full-time person dedicated to actually working STEM education. We have about 5 or 6 locations that actually have a full-time person. And sometimes that full-time person isn't just K12, they might be K through 20. So they might be the internship coordinator at their location and also doing STEM outreach. So a small percentage of what they do typically is going to be dedicated to STEM outreach, up to sometimes only 2 to 5%. So I do a survey every year of the base leads to find out what it is that they're engaged in, what percentage of time they spend of their jobs, and their jobs vary wildly. Some of them are public affairs folks that have no education experience whatsoever. Some of them are the school liaisons, which are a really important piece to connect military families with the local school districts, but they don't necessarily have an education background either in how to teach, particularly STEM. Some places are the scientists and engineers themselves who volunteered or were voluntold because they happened to arrive last and they said, you can pick up our STEM program that we'd like to host. So it's a huge challenge because the experience and the skills and the time and resources they're able to dedicate just vary wildly. So we're trying to bridge the gaps for them. We're really focused on professional development. We do monthly calls where I try to insert some kind of mini PD opportunity. We do an e-news every month where we forward articles and just different information about how you can engage in informal STEM education programming, what success looks like. We've also started just this year, we created an evaluation pilot that we're going to be running to find out not just about our outputs, which are just the numbers that we collect, but the outcomes. What is the actual impact of what we're doing across the enterprise? So it's a huge challenge to manage, and there are pros and cons, I think, to doing cookie cutter copy paste type stuff, because it's a lot easier to evaluate. It's a lot easier to make sure that everybody is on the same page. But I do really believe in participating in local and regional STEM ecosystems as the way to reach the child holistically. And so we'll continue to fight for that probably as the option moving forward for how this program runs. Next slide, please. So this is just a snapshot, if you will, of what decentralized programming even looks like. So this is the AFMC, the Air Force Material Command, out of one of the 6 major commands that we have in the Department of the Air Force, or the Air Force, I should say, not the Space Force. And you can see that they do a wide variety of different programming depending on where they are. So Wright-Patterson, for example, does a lot of outreach programming into classrooms. They have a lot of virtual content that they do because they have a lot of resourcing from AFRL itself there at Wright-Patterson. They also run the first robotics programs for the entire state of Ohio. But they also have a full-time K12 STEM coordinator who's been there for 12 years. So his program is extremely large, very robust. He's been developing it for over a decade, and you can tell. But then you swing over to, let's say, Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma. They end up doing more community STEM funding. They do more partnerships within their community. So for example, they might have an after-school STEM program that they help give funding and materials to, and then they provide volunteers who will go out from the Air Force Base and talk to the students and engage with them. So there's Hill Air Force Base, for example, in Utah. They do a lot more statewide STEM funding, whereas some of the other locations are more within the 30-mile radius of their base. It really just depends on the bandwidth and the resources available, truly. So we just kind of wanted to give you an opportunity to see that there are different ways of doing things. Another really unique one is Hanscom Air Force Base in Massachusetts. They actually contracted Lincoln Labs out of MIT, who does a ton of defense contracting work for the Department of the Air Force. But Lincoln Labs ultimately runs the defense education programming. So Hanscom really doesn't participate at all. They have the contract, we give them the funding, and then they give it to Lincoln Labs, who actually executes it on our behalf. So there's different ways, just it depends again on the location and what resources are available to them. Next slide, please. So some of the, again, base programs make up the meat of what we do. And so there are around 9 or 10 categories that we've kind of shuffled them into of what each of these locations are doing. And it goes anywhere from base and lab tours, where students are able to come and actually tour those lab locations or those center locations. We do a lot of programs, camps, and workshops. Summer camps can be a heavy lift, but a lot of bases have found ways to be able to do them, at least offering 1 week of summer camp. One of the locations that does a really robust summer camp program is Rome Lab in New York. They're the information technology lab for Air Force Research Lab, and they do all kinds of summer camps. They have a quantum camp, they have an Arduino camp, they have like autonomy camp, robotics camp. So they somehow have managed to get as many volunteers on board as possible to be able to help facilitate these camps for these students in the area. We also do things like competitions. We do a lot of judging. A lot of our scientists and engineers become judges for these competitions like JSHS, but also just even local science fairs. That sometimes a local elementary school has a science fair, and they'll recruit judges from the local base to be able to come out and judge for those students. We do a lot of expos, fairs, and festivals. So if there's a festival in the area, typically there will be a booth or there'll be some hands-on activities. Air shows are very popular, obviously, for us for a reason, and we'll have booths and STEM opportunities there as well. And some of the air shows have even developed their own STEM day that is adjacent to or supplementary to their air show, where they'll invite students from all over the area. JB Andrews, Joint Base Andrews in DC, does a massive STEM day the day before their air show, and they invite students from all over the national capital region to come and attend. So they'll do anything from student mentoring, presentations and lectures. We do STEM lending libraries for a lot of locations. They'll choose to have a bank of STEM kits or resources that the students will be able to, or the teachers will be able to borrow, but also the volunteers themselves. If the volunteers go into a classroom and they want to do some kind of hands-on activity with the students that supports whatever it is they're talking about, they can borrow that from those STEM lending libraries. And like I said earlier, teacher professional development is important to us. We want to make sure we're developing relationships with teachers. We want them to understand that we're not recruiting their students into the military. We're recruiting their students into STEM majors that may someday help support national defense through the work that they do in the research areas and centers. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, national partners is also a portion of what we do. We like to provide financial and coordination support to our different partners. I already talked about JSHS as a really great example. Other ones that we partner with are the Air Force Association programs. They're now the Air and Space Forces Association. So I'll just call them AFA from now on because it's a mouthful to say. But they actually have some really cool student competitions. It's called Cyber Patriot and Stellar Explorers. So Cyber Patriot is a cyber competition, Stellar Explorers is a space competition, and students from around the country get to participate in those competitions and win scholarships and prizes. So we help support that as well. And then they also do camps during the summer, and so we actually bring some of their curriculum onto our bases where they host summer camps. Our other partners, the Griffith Institute in Rome, New York, they are our Partnership Intermediary Agreement, our PIA, and essentially they're a nonprofit that helps provide administrative support to our program. So one of the things that we're trying to determine is how we can work more closely with them moving forward. We'd like to maybe start providing scholarships of our own, and when working in the government can be really challenging. There's a lot of mechanisms and things that we can't do because of the fact that we're the federal government. But working with groups like the Griffith Institute, they're able to help do some of this work on our behalf via a contract vehicle. And then DoD STEM, they charge us with a lot of data calls and metrics collection, but they're also a really important partner that they brainstorm with us. They help provide internal funding for some of the programming we do across the components, and they're just a really great collaborative and evaluation partner. Next slide, please. So the DoD has defined our target audiences. I thought this would be really important to share because these are sort of the three groups that we consider our underserved, underrepresented groups. Two of them are a little bit smaller groups, and then one of them is a really large sort of catch-all umbrella. But the primary STEM target audiences for all the DoD components is, it should say K12 girls in physical sciences, which I have not updated the slide since that got updated last time. But essentially, we do have girls in the STEM world, but they're mostly in the biological sciences or some more of the soft sciences, the medical sciences. So we're really trying to make a push, not just for girls in general, but girls to go into engineering, to go into physics, to go into math, to go into computer science. Those are areas that typically do not have a lot of female representation, so we're trying to push girls more into the physical science location. Military connected children are very important to us, particularly the ones that have to move around a lot, whose education might get chopped up a little bit because of that experience. So we're trying to provide a lot of STEM education opportunities at our bases, no matter where the student's coming from. We do some programming specifically for military connected children. And then the big umbrella group, underrepresented, underserved student groups. And this is a large group. This is going to be your low income, qualified for free reduced meals, Title I schools, rural schools, racial and ethnic minorities, English as a second language learners, first generation college students. It's a big umbrella, but it is important to us to call that out specifically because we want to try and tackle the disparity within each of those groups as best we can and provide them opportunities they might not otherwise have had. Next slide, please. So some challenges and projects we're working on. I like to be very transparent that it is not easy to do this particular type of work, particularly in the Department of Defense, where we don't necessarily have a lot of educational resources. We reach out to the Department of Education and our other components a lot to try and brainstorm and figure out ways to meet the challenges that we have. Next slide, please. So one of our challenges is what we call a disconnected pipeline for the Department of Air Force work. For the Department of Air Force workforce. The idea that, we do a lot of sort of, like I said, siloed or ad hoc type things. And it's not just the K12 program, it's across the entire enterprise. So we have internships, for example, but we don't have a centralized internship hub. If you want to apply for an internship at the Air Force or the Space Force, there is no one-stop shop that you can go to. You have to go to every individual internship program website to find out how to apply, what's required of you. The requirements are typically different. The timelines are typically different. Even the pay is typically different. So there's a lot of challenges that come with this disconnected pipeline. How do we get a student from elementary school all the way into the workforce in sort of continuous motion or a continuum of opportunities? So one of the projects that I'm deeply engaged in is the Air Force Research Lab specifically has created a new human capital strategy. And the idea with the human capital strategy is to create that undisrupted flow of students who are excited about STEM, decide that they want to commit their lives to being in STEM, intern with us, and then ultimately work for us. So I wanted to showcase this because this is a bigger project on a bigger scale than even K12 can tackle. But it's something that I think the Department of the Air Force hasn't done well historically and is trying to. So we've got certain smaller organizations within the department that are working on this, and the Air Force Research Lab is the first one to come up with sort of this overarching strategy that we just kicked off about a year ago. And we're trying to figure out ways ways to make sure that we're attracting and accessing the best talent we can. Next slide, please. Another challenge is how we communicate and just general awareness. So one of the biggest problems that we realized was that we didn't have a strong brand. If you think about NASA, I always sort of put NASA on that pedestal. NASA has a very strong brand to the point where people will wear their t-shirts. Like you can buy their t-shirt at almost any store. You go to Target, there's a NASA t-shirt. You go to Walmart, there's a NASA t-shirt. So something about NASA has obviously captured our imagination, gotten people excited enough that they want to represent it on the clothes that they wear every day. So I always use the t-shirt metaphor. I told the Secretary of the Air Force, I had an opportunity to brief him about 2 months ago, which was a huge experience, amazing experience. But I said, we know success when people are wearing our t-shirts because it means that we're so in the sort of zeitgeist of America that people recognize it as something that they want to be a part of, that they want represented on their chest. And so we may never get there. And again, we have challenges that NASA doesn't. We are a military organization. There are a lot of misconceptions and myths that go with that about what it means to work for a military organization or to be connected to a military organization. But we're trying to get around that. So we decided to look outside of ourselves and figure out ways and brainstorm ways to have a better message and a better way to reach teachers and students where they are. So we've partnered with the Shipyard, who recently did a huge rebrand for the Disney Youth Program. They're an ad agency that's here in Columbus, Ohio and California, and they're helping us do an entire rebrand of our K12 outreach programming. So you can see our current logo below. It's fine. It's something out of the 90s. It's not the greatest. It was probably developed internally years before I got here. But we didn't think it represented, number one, the fact that Space Force is a huge part of what we do now. So we've got a sort of our aviation eagle little logo guy. And we also wanted to make sure that it looked attractive to people when they were looking at it. So this is something, if you look at it compared to some of our other sister component logos, it's not very clean. It's very complicated. It doesn't necessarily translate well to a professional brand. So we recognize that and we decided to do something about it. So this is a big deal for us. We're still working on it. It's probably not going to be done until June, but we're going to have a brand new website, probably a new name. We've kind of gone back and forth on what to call ourselves since the Space Force entered the picture. So when I got here, we were calling ourselves Department of Air Force K-12 STEM. But then when I had that meeting with the Secretary of the Air Force 2 months ago, he said, no, call yourselves Air and Space Forces K-12 STEM, which is still a mouthful. So we have to figure out a way to either, come up with a good shortened version of that still represents both the air and space education aspects, or commit ourselves to an acronym, which, we're really good at doing in the Department of the Air Force is committing to acronyms. So we're trying to figure out a way to make it look a little sexier, to make it look a little more exciting, to make sure that we're projecting what we want out to the general public and making sure that it's well received by them. So we also are doing some internal communication work. We're trying to, a lot of the Department of the Air Force doesn't even know this office exists. I get a lot of, oh, let me connect you with Elyse, and they connect to me, and they're like, I didn't even know there was a K-12 STEM office. I've been doing STEM work for 20 years and nobody told me. I didn't know. So now we're trying to make all those connections even internally and really leverage the visibility of how much volunteer effort we need, how much leadership support we need in order to make this a successful program. Next slide, please. And then I know we're running out of time. I just wanted to highlight this. We need to know if what we're doing is working. So one of the things we're really dedicated to the last 2 years is figuring out our return on investment. We're really good at collecting metrics. We can collect numbers all day long. In fact, the entire DoD collects metrics, but those are just the outputs of what we do. The number of students doesn't tell us if the impact we're making is actually working. So we're actually working with COI, my old science museum, and the Smithsonian on what's called the informal science, I always get this wrong, the Informal STEM Education Evaluation Tool, which is called ICE for short. And it's essentially a way for any program to be able to pull outcome statements that they want to measure, create a survey or a metrics or a survey tool, evaluation tool to be able to deploy. And then we're going to be able to compare across the enterprise all the different programs we do. So we just piloted this very small over the summer. We're going to be expanding it out to our entire network this year. And we're going to try to collect some information beyond outputs that's going to help us understand how our programming is impacting students and teachers. Next slide, please. So that's it. That's the nutshell for you. Sorry if I went a little fast. There's a lot of moving parts to it. I tried to capture it all and give you guys an opportunity just to understand how we operate and what we do. If you're interested in or have questions that don't get answered today, please feel free to reach out to me via email. I'm always happy to hear from people and connect. So thank you so much for having me, and I'll turn it back over to you guys.
Thanks so much, Elyse. Every time I get ready to ask a question, you'd answer it in the next sentence, and then I'd get back off. So it was a very, very nice presentation, and Yeah, so glad to hear about everything that we're into, and thank you very much.
I think it was interesting to me because so many of the issues that you were talking about that you've got associated with the Air Force are very similar issues that we have as a society and as an association that happens to have the word military in its title. And a lot of people immediately get very nervous that we're trying to recruit people to the military. And I tell people to talk really fast and say American Society of Society of American Military Engineers, which is concerned with national security issues such as clean water and things like that that make them go, oh, okay. We're not the people who are necessarily the ones like inventing the ways to blow things up.
Right. And the way that I frame it sometimes, because I run into this conversation, just even in my own family, when I took this job, there was a lot of questions because I used to work in the zoo and aquarium world where it was all cuddly animals and saving the planet. And they're like, oh, now you want to blow the planet up? I said, actually, that's not the case. One of the ways that I like to really highlight is the fact that the scientists and engineers that we recruit are so important because the work they're doing is actually going to lessen the amount of lives that we have to dedicate to some of the stuff. Autonomy is huge, right? We don't have to put people in the line of battle anymore if we can figure out ways to use autonomy to be able to, do whatever it is that we need to do, whether it's delivering payloads or delivering medical supplies. So all the areas that we're operating in, Space Force is an entirely digital force. It's the first all digital service. So the Space Force folks aren't going into space and fighting, with space lasers. They're here on the ground doing, really important cyber and satellite operations that keep our GPS running, that keep, our lives, our internet running. And so I really try to highlight the fact that if we can get the best scientists and engineers in the Department of Defense, the more lives are going to be saved long term because we're solving those problems using science, technology, engineering, and math. And so I think that sometimes, at least my family has responded well to that. They're like, oh, I didn't think about that. So again, we're not recruiting. We're trying to find the best and brightest minds who are going to be able to solve the problem and get us so far ahead technology-wise that no other country is going to want to mess with us. And so I think that message helps a little bit, but it's a challenge. It's a challenge that we face every day.
Hi, Elyse. This is Liza Gruden. I'm the chair. It's nice to meet you. I was a little late because I was traveling today. But one of the things that I loved about your presentation was on slide 20, where you talked about, taking those K through 12 students into the workforce. And that's something that we're focusing on, where we're trying to link up. We have a K through 12 STEM outreach, and then we have a community for camps, and then one for college outreach and one for young professionals. So we're trying to do the same thing where we get all of these different communities of interest to work together to bring those children through the pipeline. And it's interesting to me that, like Janine said, that there's so many parallels between like what you're looking at and what we're looking at. It's Absolutely. So important.
Yeah, and I think that, it's a balancing act. I really believe we're on a tightrope sometimes because we don't want necessarily the work of one thing to bleed over into the other. I think that sometimes we can get out of our lanes and instead of doing what we're really good at, in your case, maybe you've got committees. In our case, we've got the K12 outreach, we've got the university internships, we've got workforce development. And so I believe that they should exist in sort of separate entities working on the things they do best, but then the goal is to connect them, with a bridge of some kind or several bridges. So like if you're the K12, outreach committee, you're really focused on K12 outreach and not necessarily what everyone else is doing, but working directly with those folks and saying, where are the connection pieces? How do we connect what we do and sort of meet in the middle? And that's kind of what we're trying to do. Because again, I am not a university internship expert. I'm not here to work on internships. I want my students that are engaged in my programs to go into an internship, but I'll probably never also be in control of that particular program. So I'm trying to find the ways to bridge with the intern folks who then bridge into, the workforce development piece. But it's a challenge. It's a balancing act.
It is. One of the things that we've talked about is like some kind of handoff or mentoring, where we are having touch points with these kids, so especially you know, in the underrepresented communities, they might not have anybody who's really interested in them pursuing a STEM career. So just having someone out there that's an engineer that's interested in them that they can go to with questions, that can go a really long way.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
And ironically, we call our program the Guided Pathways. I noticed that you had Pathways as one of your programs. We're calling our linkages between the K12 and college and young professionals and all that the Guided Pathway. So, and that's something that
I love
we're
this.
working on.
This is the fight I have on a regular basis, because most of the Department of the Air Force wants to call it a pipeline, and I hate that word for a very specific reason, because it reminds me of a conveyor belt. There's one entry in, and you're doing the exact same thing to get to the other side, whereas Pathways is more a roundabout way. Sometimes some of our students are going to come to us from a young age, and they're hopefully going to stick with us the whole way. Some of these students are never going to experience any of my K-12 programs. They're going to come in from maybe an academic internship. Some of these, like for me, just even working for the Department of the Air Force, I had nothing to do with any of the military stuff beforehand. And so I found my own pathway, my own entry ramp into this work. So I think that it's really important that we realize that not everyone's going to come from the same place or from the same area. And I also think that we know that, especially starting with the millennial generation and moving on down to Gen Z and now Gen Alpha is the generation that's coming up, they're not going to stay in one place. Nobody stays in one place anymore. Sometimes you're going to pop into industry, and then you're going to pop back out and maybe go to the government. Maybe then you're going to academia, but then maybe you want to come back to the government again. And so I think we need to recognize that early, but I don't think that our workforce development internally is set up to help facilitate that sort of in and out experience. And I think it's important that we have diverse experiences so that we can bring fresh eyes to things. But again, you know, at least from where I sit, I can see for the scientists and engineers that we have, you enter at the bottom and you got to work your way up. And once you leave, it's really hard to get back in, but they don't encourage you to go out and to find other opportunities so that you can bring that really great experience back. So I think that's one of the challenges, is this pipeline versus pathways mentality that I'm trying to, from a very small vantage point, trying to push into the culture of the Air Force, but we'll see how that goes.
And ironically, too, the primary member of SAME who is advancing this is a man named Arpan Patel, who is or was, I think he's transitioning out in the Air Force. So he's been the one who has been, you know, this was a project he did for our leadership development program. And so I think we have a lot of connections. We're definitely going to have to keep talking.
I would be happy to, yeah, anytime. I'm happy to connect. I'll continue my conversations with my contacts through the STEM camps, but yeah, let me know how I can be of service.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that we always like to talk about is how can we help you, you know, with your mission? And I assume that there are volunteer opportunities, and I did miss a couple of slides at the beginning, so that you might have covered those, but I just want to make sure that, you know, we're tying all those pieces together.
Mm-hmm. You'll probably have to let me have a chance to think about that, because as you probably saw from our partnership slide, we don't do a lot of necessarily like external partners. A lot of our external partners are at the community level. So it might be as simple as connecting where you guys have camps, even if they're not necessarily Air Force camps. Because one of the things I believe in is co-opetition. So I often will elevate the Army and the Navy's programming as well, because I believe that we're all trying to get to the same place and we need the same people. So we might as well work together. So if there are locations where we can, you know, if we have a local base nearby that maybe we can help recruit for that type of thing, that might be an opportunity. I think right now, one of the things we're struggling with is we're trying to create a new strategic plan, and I'm having difficulties getting leadership to just agree on anything. We can't even agree on what outreach means. So one of the pieces of that is the partnership component. What does it mean to be a partner? How do you partner with us? Then what does that look like? So we do a lot of internal volunteer work. We have a lot of our internal folks that work already for the Department of the Air Force, but there might be opportunities, like JSHS is always looking for local judges for their regional competitions. That's one of the big things. So maybe this is me, I guess, helping each other through this, but I could provide that list of where those regional competitions are, because they're always looking for judges for some of those programs. And we can't always provide them because we don't necessarily have a base nearby. So like that could be something where if you guys, you know, if you're scattered all over the United States, you're able to say, oh, we've got networks we can pull from. That would be a huge help.
Okay. Yeah, we would definitely love that. You know, we can get the local post involved, and if there's anything virtual, then we can put out like a national all call for judges as well. It's so nice that now that things are virtual, so you don't have to have that physical proximity.
Exactly, and there's actually one of the things itself is virtual. So,
hi, this is Jeff. I dropped the GoToMeeting. I had to call back in, but I was just going to say that our organization is made up of civilians and contractors and military folks in uniform. So even if on your project where you tried to have a competition or a visit, have a school in all 50 states, we probably have a post nearby, and if it has to be a DoD member, we have DoD members in almost every post. So I know, like for Wizards of Wright here at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, we have private sector folks, we have civilian, federal civil service, we have folks in uniform, and then we have embedded contractors on the base, and so it's folks with CACs, folks that represent Wright-Patterson, and we can certainly, SAME local posts affiliated with the base can certainly get you judges or speakers or whatever you need.
That's perfect, because in about a month and a half, the JSHS judge call is going to go out. So how about, Jeff, I will send that information to you and you can disperse it across the network for SAME.
Oh, that'd be great.
Because that's literally like our next big thing. We're going to be recruiting judges for the big.
And I heard you talking about mentors earlier. One of the things I've seen this year locally here in the Dayton area that I've not seen before is, in addition to judges, the schools are recruiting engineers and scientists as mentors for the science fair projects. It's not just the science teachers anymore. They want a mentor to come in or talk on the phone with a student, once a week for 6 or 8 weeks as they get ready for their science fair project. And I've not seen that before, but I think it was Liza talking about mentorship, and I think that's such a key to actually recruiting people into the STEM pipeline pathway into the STEM career field is showing them what we do.
Absolutely. So actually, that in my mind, I think one of the things that we could do immediately to start engaging with each other is having, you can send me like a list of points of contact for all your locations. I can get those to the bases that are nearby and make sure that they have them and they can immediately contact that person to start recruiting for that type of thing. Because all of that local recruitment is done at the local level. So if I can make sure each of my base leads has contact information for you guys, then they can immediately reach out when they have a need and be able to recruit from that local area.
And in some cases, hopefully they already are in contact, but that is definitely, I'm sure that, in half the cases they're not. So that connection is very important.
Yeah, I'd love to trade lists with you guys. So I can also provide the base lead contact information for you guys if you want to reach out to them as well.
Yeah, that would be great if you could send that to Jeff, because I know you have Jeff's contact information.
Yeah, I'll send it. We'll do some trading.
Thank you very much for your time. We definitely appreciate you, taking an hour out of your day to talk with us. And I second what Jeff said. It was a great presentation. So thank you.
It's always a pleasure. Let me know how I can be of further service. It was nice to meet everybody.
All right. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you.
Liza, are we going to treat this as the end? You had some additional slides that you were going to go through, but did you want to continue on?
No, I think I include those just so that as fillers in case we need to. The only thing I guess I would say is that we have a great call in January with E4 USA, so make sure you keep an eye out for that notice.
And we will not be meeting in the month of December because we're getting ready for the holidays. So thank you for coming today, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.